Casey started to get an uneasy feeling the longer this game went on. The bouncer at the entrance now stood to block the way out, and the onlookers were becoming increasingly agitated. Noriko and Casey were winning the match at this point, and she wagered they didn't like that. As the rounds progressed, Charlotte wasn't trying as hard to hide the use of her power. Casey followed suit, and the game devolved into an air-powered battle between Casey and Charlotte. Noriko stood at the end of the table, leaning against his billiards cue, never taking his eyes off Van, who never took his eyes off the game. It was the ladies going back and forth now, with Casey having the advantage. The next time Charlotte made a move, her air went beyond the ball to rush past Casey's cheek. It was so close, it almost cut her. So she glared at Charlotte. Not particularly wanting to start a battle, Casey ignored the move and took her turn. Noriko shifted away from leaning on his cue. Charlotte's next move sent a razor-sharp air attack directly at Casey. She dropped to the ground as she dodged. Noriko disappeared from her side and matched daggers with Van across the room. The other men around the table closed in on her, so Casey took the opportunity to send out a gust of wind to push everyone farther away from her. She glanced at Noriko, who was locked in a battle with Van, then turned her attention back to her own situation. Charlotte was nowhere to be seen, but 3 men approached Casey. 3-on-1? Doesn't seem very fair, Casey said sarcastically, then spun and threw ice daggers at each of her opponents. They all staggered backward after being hit. Then 4 more people surrounded her. She smirked and glanced around at her opponents to evaluate them. She launched herself at the first man, sending a burst of air into his stomach. He hunched forward as the air punched his gut. Casey shoved her knee upward, striking him in the chin. As he fell to the ground, she flipped over his body and threw ice daggers at the man behind him. Then she turned and froze the feet of the last 2 men on the ground. One of the 2 instantly melted his ice with his firepower. Casey threw another dagger at the man still trapped before putting up an air wall to block the fire coming her way. By the time the fire dispersed, Casey was already on top of the man. Grasping his arm, she used the contact to run a bolt of static electricity through him. As the man fell, the bouncer stood up near Casey. Noriko was in front of her the next moment, facing the bouncer and blocking his path to her. She turned to find no other men coming toward them now. Her gaze rested on Van, who stood near the bar, breathing heavily. She eyed him for a moment, then teleported herself to reappear at his left side, her ice dagger at his throat. "If I were you, I'd call off that bouncer," she hissed into his ear. Van laughed and put his hands up in front of him. "It's been a while since I've had this much fun. You 2 are something else." Casey took a step back, dissipating her dagger, and Noriko appeared next to her. He glanced at Van skeptically and stood close to Casey. "What's your aim?" Casey asked. Van dropped his hands and shrugged. "I'm just having fun. No harm in a game, right? Anyway, welcome to Callisto, the home of Van's bounty hunters."